Morning, everyone. So it's probably way early for you guys. This is not the normal lesson for today. This is that promise lesson where we would finish up the Alma here. And the reason I'm doing it now is because, one, this week was crazy. I had the busiest week at work. In fact, it was busier than it probably was equivalent to a normal week I had way back before March. So it was kind of crazy. And then the second thing is the uh, this was also back to school week. Like school started this week for all my girls, and then we had family picture yesterday and all these crazy things, which are kind of cool. So we'll have some pictures coming out soon. But yeah, for the most part, it was just a crazy week. So I didn't get a chance to record this lesson. So I'm just going to do it live now. So if you guys want to watch it later on, you can just watch it later on, and then um, I'll do the normal lesson today. I'll get it scheduled, so you'll see kind of the schedule option there. So it'll be there and ready to go. So you can just kind of watch it normally. But the reason I wanted to do a separate video for, and if you recall, we stopped at chapter 58. And then we're going to finish basically chapters 59 to 63. So we're going to finish up Alma today. And the reason is because the Sunday school lesson that was basically prepared, I guess, if you will, or set, didn't really address these chapters a whole lot at all. And I know Helaman and the Stripling Lawyers gets a lot of spotlight, which is great because, obviously there were some great things that happened in last week's lesson, right? So no complaints there. But these next chapters, I think, are so critical because they're about these letters between the captain and obviously the chief governor of the land. And I think it's so relevant to our day because while these were, letters that were written, it can be very much like I compare it to like text messaging or email, that sometimes when we message a friend or a family member or whoever, either within a text message or we send a letter off, sometimes what we read in the letter or what we read in the text message can be misconstrued. Sometimes you'll read it and you'll think that it means one thing and the intent was something different. And obviously there's something very different about just simply saying what you want to say, because when you're in the moment, it's kind of like these Sunday school lessons. If we actually had a group here, there would be some group discussion. There would be, the spirit would probably be way stronger, right? Because you now have a collective whole of everybody sharing their witness and their testimony. And I think that's so much more powerful when you're in person like that. Now, obviously with a video, it's a little bit easier to convey a message, right? Because it's a video. You can actually see how I'm moving or my tone of voice, things of that nature. But man, when it comes to a letter or a text message, it can be really miscommunicated sometimes. And that even happens at work. I'm in HR. And in human resources, let me tell you, we deal with a lot of complaints, if you will. And then it turns out that an email or something's written can be completely, like I said, misconstrued. And so it leads to contention, right? So I really love these chapters because it's about two letters that are written. And it's also about the humility and the understanding intent, I guess, on both parts. Like the assumption that you're doing this because you're trying to do the right thing instead of, oh my gosh, why did you say that to me? Like just kind of that concept. And so anyway, so that's I wanted to talk about it. This will probably be a pretty short lesson. I've got a ton of notes here, but I want to just kind of pick out some verses that stood out to me that I think were important. So we're going to start in chapter 59. So chapter 59 is really short. Moroni is done reading the letter from Helaman. He's so excited about it. He rejoices in the fact that Helaman has had such great success. But he's also a little frustrated. He's like, how come Helaman's not getting help? Then something personal happens to Moroni. Nephi, one of the little cities there, gets taken by the Lamanites, completely taken. So chapter 59 is about Nephi being lost to the Lamanites. Now suddenly it's personal because when this happens, up to this point, Moroni, he's saddened. He's like, and he immediately writes to Pahoran at that point. I mean, I think there's a verse there. He says he immediately writes to Pahoran and says, hey, you need to send Helaman some troops. Then he goes about his business. He goes about his normal war. But Nephihah is taken. And all of a sudden, Moroni is in this stupor. Because in verse 11, this is the only verse we're going to read in this chapter. Now, when Moroni saw that the city of Nephihah was lost, he was exceedingly sorrowful and began to doubt because of the wickedness of the people, whether they should not fall into the hands of their brethren. So suddenly, this letter from Helaman, and he obviously writes Pahoran, he takes care of that. But he suddenly realizes that, oh my word, we just lost a major city. How is that possible unless it weren't for the wickedness? Because the Lord has promised us that he's going to protect us. And this was not a fulfillment of that promise. Something's going on, right? And so that's when it's kind of a trigger point for Moroni that, okay, I just got this letter from Helaman and something's happening. Now it's happening to me. All right, we gotta do something about this. So basically, he's angry. Verse 13, Moroni gets angry with the indifference from the government. Why is the government not sending us more troops and more supplies, food even? We're dying of hunger. And so in his anger and his passionate state, okay, he writes this letter. But it's important to understand that his anger, one, I think is justified. Two, it's more of, I'm angry because I fear that these good people, these troops and the righteous people that are out there trying to fight this battle are going to lose because of the wickedness of others. And they're not going to be able to fulfill these promises. So that's really where his anger, he's more afraid of God than he is of, Pahoran or any government, entity or body. And we're going to kind of see that in some of the verses here. So in verse 3, he talks about the suffering. Like I said, we're not going to read a lot of the verses here, but he's like, he in his epistle, he recognizes, hey, we've had a lot of suffering here. Helaman has had a lot of suffering. I just wrote you a letter previously about this. We're suffering, hunger, thirst, fatigue, all of the things. We've lost thousands of lives. And in verse 5, he's more worried about this neglect, and in fact, it's kind of interesting in verse 4 because he says, if this is all we had suffered, hunger, thirst, fatigue, we wouldn't be murmuring, right? But it's not just that. Now we've seen thousands of our people fall by the sword, and we're still getting no help. There's no strength. There's no succor that's coming. What's going on? You've withheld your provisions, and he starts asking some questions. Can you sit upon your thrones in a state of thoughtless stupor while your enemies are spreading the work of death around you? Valid question, right? And some of these questions are pretty harsh. Verse 12, do ye not suppose that because so many of your brethren have been killed, it is because of their wickedness? I say unto you, if ye have supposed this, ye have supposed in vain. For I say unto you, there are many who have fallen by the sword, and behold, it is to your condemnation. Like, I blame you, if because of this wickedness that we're seeing, that now we're starting to lose cities, do you suppose in verse 11 that you can sit upon your thrones, and because of the exceeding goodness of God, you could do nothing and he would deliver you? Behold, if you've supposed this, you've supposed in vain. So, these are pretty harsh words. And verse 13, it's kind of eye-opening a little bit, verse 13. The Lord suffereth the righteous to be slain, that his justice and judgment may come upon the wicked. And the reason I think that's important is because sometimes we wonder why good people suffer sometimes, right? And they're doing all the right things. They're being righteous and studying the gospel and just doing the good things, and yet they still suffer. And that's hard sometimes to see that, especially when they're doing the right thing. And Moroni, here's an example of Moroni actually experiencing that. He's got these troops. They're giving their lives for the country, for liberty. And he knows they're righteous because he's with them all day. They probably pray every day. They eat their food every day together. They battle together. There's no better person that knows these troops than Moroni. And so he sees the righteousness that they're experiencing. And so he's a little frustrated by it. And he does recognize, behold, they do enter into the rest of the Lord their God, But here's the core of it. Now, behold, I say to you, I fear exceedingly that the judgments of God will come upon this people because of their exceeding slothfulness, yea, even the slothfulness of our government, which obviously is a hit on Pahoran himself, and their exceedingly great neglect towards their brethren, yea, towards those who have been slain. For were it not for the wickedness which first commenced at our head, we could have withstood our enemies, that they could have gained no power of us. Now, do you remember that story? He's referring to the kingmen, and he kind of talks about them. We're not going to read all of these, but he's referring to the kingmen that, hey, if we hadn't had this little insurrection internally with some of these kingmen, Morianton, I think it was his name, then we probably wouldn't have this issue to begin with. We had this internal thing, and so because of this internal issue now, we're having this problem. And ultimately, I love verse 23. Do you suppose that God will look upon you as guiltless while you still sit and behold these things? And he asks several questions. Have you forgotten the command? In fact, actually, I think this is important. So in verse 18, actually, let me go back. So in verse 18, he asks a question, why is this important? Well, we're not seeking authority and power like the kingdom did. Maybe you're trying to do that. Maybe you join them. In verse 19, or maybe you've just neglected us because you're in the heart of the country, you're surrounded by security, and therefore you're safe. So he's basically saying, so maybe you join the kingdom, maybe that's the issue. Maybe you're just secure and you're like, I'm in the heart of the country, I don't have to worry about anything. Or maybe verse 20, which might be the worst of all, is you've forgotten the commandments of God and you've forgotten that he has delivered you out of the hands of your enemies. Maybe that's what it is. And so if you honestly think that the Lord is going to deliver us by just giving up or just being complacent, that's an issue. So while you sit there in idleness, we're out here battling. And so in verse 23, I think, is where the core of this is. Behold, I say unto you, I would that you should remember that God has said that the inward vessel shall be cleansed first, and then shall the outer vessel be cleansed also. So I think the important thing to understand here is Moroni, in writing this and actually addressing that, I think he's alluding to the fact that, what? I'm willing to bet that the issue is those original kingmen who had caused problems in the first place. Because of what they did and their wickedness, you've either joined them, you've just kind of become complacent, sit back, or you've just completely let go of God altogether and decided to not even be obedient anymore. And so, this is a hard hit. If you had gotten a letter like this, and you're basically being accused of being a traitor, except ye repent, verse 24, except ye repent of what we have done, I'm coming after you, basically, is what Moroni says. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to be there and take care of this, just like I did with the original kingdom, right? I'm going to come back and take care of this. And verse 28, I do not fear your power nor your authority. It is my God whom I fear. And it is according to his commandments that I do take my sword to defend the cause of my country. And it is because of your iniquity that we have suffered so much loss. Because of you, right? So this can be really, like I said, this is a pretty harsh letter. And then he kind of ends, hey, okay, I wait for your assistance. Let us know how you're going to administer to our relief, and we'll go from there. Anyway, like I said, I feel like this could be taken so many ways, right? When you read this chapter, he's writing it in the heat of his anger, right? He's being passionate about this. But I think ultimately he makes the comment, I'm doing this because I'm afraid that certain people are not obeying the commandments, which is making all of us suffer, which isn't fair to the righteous, right? And so he sees this injustice happening. And so that's his letter. And like I said, you can read some of the more specific parts of this. Verse 34, though, I want to end this chapter with this. Behold, I am constrained according to the covenant which I have made to keep the commandments of God. Therefore, I would that ye should adhere to the word of God and send speedily unto me of your provisions and of your men, and also to Helaman. If ye do not this, I will come to you speedily, and God will not suffer that we should perish with hunger. I'm the chief captain. I seek not for power, but to pull it down. I seek not for honor of the world, but the glory of my God and the freedom and welfare of my country. Bold words, righteous words, I think, based on how he's described this, his biggest fear is, I don't want to offend God in this. But these are the promises we've received, and I believe God. Like to me, for Moroni, this is showing a tremendous amount of faith on his part and boldness that he made that covenant. He knows the covenant is real. He knows the blessings are real, but they're not being realized because of others. And if I have to come and take care of those others, I'll come take care of them, right? So this ends chapter 60, okay? So chapter 61 is the response from Pahoran. Now, the reason I love this chapter is because if you look at chapter 60 and this epistle from Moroni, it could have been taken so many ways, right? Pahoran could have been angry. You know, sometimes, when we receive messages like that where we're kind of being called out, if you will, rather than look at the context of what it was possibly written in, sometimes we jump to our own conclusions or we get angry ourselves, right? Pahoran, like Moroni, could have just gotten angry about it and been really nasty, right? But no, look at Pahoran's response. I love this, and it's a to me, it's a testimony that Pahoran truly was a righteous judge, right? And governor of the land. This man was a righteous man. And it's unfortunate because his kids don't end up so well, and that'll be our lesson later today, right? But he himself was a righteous man. And so let's look at his letter in chapter 61. So first of all, he basically says, "Behold, I say unto you, Moroni, that I do not joy in your great affliction, yea, it grieves my soul." So he addresses the issue right away. It grieves my soul that you're having to suffer these things. Okay. And I do not join in your afflictions, right? But behold, there are those who do join in your afflictions, yea, in so much that they have risen up in rebellion against me. And also those of my people are freemen, and they have risen up and are exceedingly numerous. And he basically talks about how they took over Zarahemla. They took over the judgment seat. They put some guy in charge, Pakias, I think was his name. They put some guy in charge as a king and basically kick Pahoran out. So Pahoran is not even in Zarahemla right now. He's actually in Gideon, in the city Gideon. And so he talks about this. He talks about how I had to flee to Gideon to escape these kingmen that rose up again, trying to take over the government. In fact, not only did they, kick us out, but they actually have already written the Lamanites, and they're just planning. Like, this guy thinks that he's going to be the king if he allows the Lamanites just to come in and take over. So obviously an insurrection, right, happening within the city. And in verse 9, I love this comment from Pahoran. "Behold, in your epistle you've censored me." There's so many other choice words he could have used, right? "But you've censored me, but it matters not, I'm not angry, but do rejoice in the greatness of your heart." I love that comment because, like I said, in emails and messages, and oftentimes when we're communicating with people, things can be taken so incorrectly, right? And so he just talks about this importance of rejoicing in the greatness of your heart. And I think that's a good lesson to understand or to really think about. What was the other person's heart who may have offended you or hurt you or said something bad, right? Where was their heart at? What was going on? I mean, typically people who wrong us or make us feel bad, those are like momentary things, right? But overall, we know that person. We've known them for years, right? And we've known them for a long time. So are they just struggling right now? Is there something going on? In this case, Pahoran was really struggling, and he knows Moroni is struggling, and so he understands it. I see where your heart is, right? So I just think that's something to really think about. If you had an offense or you're not really happy with someone right now or frustrated by comments that certain people say, just think about it a little bit. Think about it. Where was their heart? Where is your heart? And ultimately, what do you want to see happen there? I mean, the big picture, right? We're all children of God. So, I, Pahoran, do not seek power, save only to retain my judgment seat and preserve the rights and liberty of my people. My soul standeth fast in that liberty in which God hath made us free. So the good news is Pahoran is definitely on Moroni's side here. "Behold, we will resist wickedness even unto bloodshed." And here's this list. There's this list that he puts in this letter. We would not shed the blood of the Lamanites if they would stay in their own land. So if they wouldn't come and attack us, we wouldn't shed their blood. We would not shed the blood of our brethren if they would not rise up in rebellion and take up the sword against us. And then we would not subject ourselves to the yoke of bondage if it were requisite with the justice of God, or if he should command us to do so. So interesting. Like, we wouldn't do these things if we weren't commanded to do so. And he even talks about, we would even be willing to subject ourselves to be slaves to the Lamanites if that's what the Lord wanted us to do. But behold, he doth not command us that we shall subject ourselves to our enemies, but that we should put our trust in him, that he will deliver us. That's the command, that we trust him and know that he'll deliver us. I mean, I just think it's a great letter, a great comment. Therefore, my beloved brother, Moroni, let us resist evil, and whatsoever evil we cannot resist with our words, yea, such as rebellions and dissensions, let us resist them with our swords, that we may retain our freedom, that we may rejoice in the great privilege of our church and in the cause of our Redeemer and our God. Awesome, right? So he says, Moroni, come. You need to come, because there is an insurrection. I need your help. I can't do this without you. And one last thing on this, he sends a few provisions and says, hey, why don't you come out, and according to our faith, we'll take over Zarahemla again. And verse 19, and I think this is really the power of, just the last 3 verses of this chapter is kind of a powerful testimony to how the passion and faith of others can have an impact on us. Now, Moroni, I do joy in receiving your epistle, for I was somewhat worried concerning what we should do, whether it should be just in us to go against our brethren. But ye have said, except they repent, the Lord hath commanded you that you should go against them. See that ye strengthen Lehi and Teancum in the Lord. Tell them to fear not, for God will deliver them, yea, and also all those who stand fast in that liberty wherewith God hath made them free. And now I close my epistle to my beloved brother. So what I am seeing here is Pahoran was a little on the fence. The government gets taken over. He gets basically pushed out to Gideon, and he's questioning, should we go against them? You ever met people like that? They're a little bit more conservative than others. And so they're like, yeah, I don't want to kill people. Why would I do that? These are our brothers. Why? I don't want to go do that. But Moroni's epistle actually strengthened Pahoran, recognizing that this was a command from God. I mean, there it was. Ye have said, except they repent, the Lord hath commanded you that you should go against them. And so Pahoran realizes that this strength of Moroni and his words basically buoys him up, right? Gives him strength again to say, okay, Moroni, you come, we're going to go. We're going to go together, and we're going to do this. And we're going to do this because the Lord's commanded it. So anyway, fun little letters from them. Like I said, I really thought they were important, and I think this is going to be really close to the end. We're going to talk about chapter 62 and 63. There's a lot of history here that I just want to go through because it does lead into this week's lesson, which is in a couple hours here. But basically, Moroni comes. They do take over the freedom. Pachus was slain in verse 80, slain, just to kind of give you an idea. And it's kind of interesting because on the way, Moroni uses his title of liberty again and actually gains like thousands of more followers, or troops, if you will, that are actually able to help him come into Zarahemla and take it back over and kill Pachus and the other people. And unfortunately, with this, they also have to create a strict law. And in this strict law, they say, if any of you want to start rising up again in rebellion and be a kingman instead of the freeman that we are, we're going to have to kill you. And that's what they do. All the dissenters, they kill them. They basically kill anybody who wants to, start an insurrection again. And that's how bad it gets internally, right? We have to slay you and put these strict commands in place. So then they send provisions off to Helaman in the 31st year. So all of that happened in the 30th year of the reign of Judges. So in the 31st year, they send some things to Helaman, which is about 61 BC. just for reference. And then from there, we're going to go on to a few verses here. They basically, in taking over Zarahemla, they also decide, Moroni decides, hey, you know what happened, Pahoran? There was this city called Nephi-Ha that we lost, and I would love to take it back. Because while this whole insurrection was happening, that's the city that we lost. And so Moroni basically tells Pahoran, I'm sure, and says, hey, can you help me? We got to go get this other city that we lost, a few chapters ago, right? And so they do. They march towards Nephi-Ha, and they capture a lot of the Lamanites. And in verse 16, a lot of these Lamanites, make a covenant to lay down their weapons of war. And not only do they make a covenant, but in verse 17, they're actually sent to go live with the Ammonites, with the other Lamanites who had, made covenants, right? By this time, they're much older, so this is a new generation, if you will. But they're sent to the Ammonites to dwell with the people of Ammon. I think it's really interesting. They have a lot of these Lamanites that convert after this, after they're captured. Obviously, they're kind of forced into it a little bit, being captured, a prisoner of war. That can be a force. But either way, they make a covenant. I mean, the fact that they're willing to make this covenant and pact, they do that. And so they get safe. And so it's kind of interesting how they take it. So the story is basically Moroni, they get to the city and they find that where they're at, all of the troops of the Lamanites are actually in this one area of the city. I think it's on the east side. And so then he basically goes to the west side where there's basically no one. And they put ladders over the wall, and he literally gets all his troops overnight into the wall with all their weapons. And so when the Lamanites wake up in the morning, it's like, oh, we're taken. And they end up killing a lot of the Lamanites. But the cool part about it is I see this as a huge fulfillment of the promise the Lord had given them about their righteous cause of defending themselves. In verse 26, thus had Moroni and Pahoran obtained the possession of the city of Nephi-Ha without the loss of one soul. And there were many of the Lamanites who were slain. So obviously there were many Lamanites that were slain, because I'm sure they fought back, if you will, not wanting to be captured. But Moroni and Pahoran, they lost no one. And I think this, we read about, we just read about Helaman and the Stripling warriors and how they had never lost anyone in the battles that they had gone through. And now Moroni and Pahoran have a similar experience because of their preparation and their being guided, if you will, by this noble cause. And I assume fully by the Spirit that what they were doing was the right thing, to the point that they're able to avoid any bloodshed on their side at all. I mean, such a beautiful testament, right? Because like I said, we read all these stories about the Stripling warriors and the fact that they didn't lose anyone, but here was another example of them not losing one soul. And I think it's important to recognize that, right? That they also had a similar blessing because of their obedience to what they knew was right. So anyway, so just kind of a fun little story there. They take over Nephi-Ha, and essentially they get to this point where they become so strengthened that they go to basically take over the rest of the Lamanites and get the Lamanites out of the land in their entirety. And in this process, they meet with the main body of the Lamanites, which, if you recall, Amram had become the new king, the brother of Malachiah. Amram had taken over. Amram, remember Teancum, how he stole into the camp and kills Malachiah and then escapes? Well, Teancum is a little angry again. He's one of those men who are very passionate, very righteous man, that, from what Moroni is saying. But Teancum decides to, slip into the camp again of the Lamanites and kill Amram this time with a javelin to the heart, which he succeeds. But unfortunately, Amram wakes up, the servants know, and they actually kill Teancum too. So Teancum fulfills his purpose, like he fulfills what he wanted to do, but at the same time, he loses his own life. And so in verse 37, came to pass, Lehi and Moroni knew that Teancum was dead. They were exceedingly sorrowful. For behold, he had been a man who had fought valiantly for his country, yea, and a true friend to liberty, and suffered many exceedingly sore afflictions. But behold, he was dead and had gone the way of all the earth. It's kind of the comment from Mormon. Yeah, but this is what happened. They had to go on. They were in the middle of warfare. And so the 31st year of the reign of Judges ends, and they succeed. They finally get all the Lamanites out, and for the most part, they establish peace. Now, one final thing in this chapter, before we just look at the history of the last chapter, I really think it's important to understand this. So because of the war, and we're going to look at verse 41 and then a few verses towards the end. In verse 41, you have two groups of people, basically. All of these faithful people, right? Members of the church, if you will. Behold, because of the exceedingly great length of the war between the Nephites and the Lamanites, many have become hardened because of the exceedingly great length of the war. Hardened. What does that mean? Think about what that means. I mean, think about people that you might know that have, unfortunately, in their lives become hardened. You know, they no longer want to listen to God. They don't have anything to do with anything. And, you know, war can do that, right? I mean, think about what war is. You know, loss of life and yeah. And in this case, loss of spirit, loss of desire, or loss of, you know, will to go out and do the right things. You just give up, right? But look at what also happens. And many were softened because of their afflictions, insomuch that they did humble themselves before God, even in the depth of humility. So you have two groups. So the question is, you know, when wars happen in our life, where are we at? What side of the spectrum are we going to be on? Are we going to become hardened, or are we going to humble ourselves before God? I think it's a really valid question, right? Where are we going to stand in our lives when these storms come, right? Wars and challenges that come. And not only that, you know, Moroni gives the command of the armies to his son Moroni-ha. And it's kind of interesting because that ha at the end, you know how we have, like, in family history, like, you know, Christopher's son, like, because it was Christopher's son, or, you know, you have the son at the end. Ha seems to be almost like a son type thing. Like Moroni-ha actually means Moroni's son, right? Whose name is Moroni. So anyway, so just kind of an interesting thought there. I have no idea if that's the case. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's just interesting how that works, because there's a few ha's in the scriptures, and they seem to be sons of. So it's kind of an interesting thought there. Pahoran goes back to the judgment seat. Helaman preaches the word of God. And here's the cool part. They begin to prosper exceedingly, okay? Which is sometimes a dangerous thing, right? Because when the Nephites would prosper, what would typically happen? They go into this pride cycle, which we're going to talk about in this week's lesson, right? But they would typically go into this bad cycle of becoming so involved with their clothing and riches and prosperity that they forget God. But look what happens to this group of people, especially those who were softened that we talked about. The people began to prosper in the land. I'm in verse 48. They began to grow exceedingly rich, but notwithstanding their riches or their strength or their prosperity, they were not lifted up in the pride of their eyes. Neither were they slow to remember the Lord their God, but they did humble themselves exceedingly before him. They did remember how great the things the Lord had done for them, that he had delivered them from death and from bonds and from prisons and from all manner of affliction, and he had delivered them out of the hands of their enemies. So first of all, they remembered, okay, that they were delivered. The second thing is they did pray unto the Lord their God continually, insomuch that the Lord did bless them according to his word, so that they did wax strong and prosper in the land. Now, Helaman dies, unfortunately, in 35. So this is, you know, several years later now, about 4 years later, okay? Helaman dies, okay? But think about that. So for 4 years at least that we see here, what are they doing? They're not letting the riches get to them. They're remembering what they had gone through, humbled by it, grateful for being delivered. And they also remember the importance of prayer every single day, continually praying unto God, okay? Such a good example of these people. They just went through this huge warfare, and what are they doing? They're remembering, they're being grateful, and they're praying. I feel like those are such important things to remember, you know, because we, you know, in our lives we go through experiences, and like I said, do we become hardened, or do we humble ourselves and pray and seek the guidance, you know, and remember what the Lord has done for us? Because oftentimes I feel like when we are led down that bad path, it's because we forget. We forget the blessings we had received before. So last chapter, mostly history. So I'm just going to relay the history, and then we're going to be done for this one. So Shiblon, the brother of like the middle brother of Helaman, takes over. He takes over the plates and the records. Okay, and in so doing, in verse 2, they actually reference Corianton again. He was a just man. So this is a description of Shiblon. He was a just man. He did walk uprightly before God, and he observed to do good continually, to keep the commandments of the Lord his God, and also did his brother. We know his brother is Corianton, right? Because Helaman at this point has already passed away. And so Corianton and Shiblon are still alive, and they're still good people. Now, in this year also, 36th year, Moroni dies, Captain Moroni. We know his son already taken over, right? And so at this point, they do something interesting happens. Hagoth and many people in the 36th and 37th year, they start building ships. And in fact, not only do they build ships, but 5,400 men, and then their women and children. So 5,400 men, and then all of their children and families, they all get in these ships and decide to go northward. And it's so crazy to think about, because I would imagine one of the reasons why they did this, and maybe some of these people were people who had become a little hardened. They're probably like, I don't want to be involved in these wars affairs anymore. This is ridiculous. Why am I sticking around here? I'm moving, right? I'm moving. I'm getting out of here. And that's what they do. I mean, thousands and thousands of people. They leave on the west side of the narrow strip of land, if you will, on the West Sea, and they go to the land northward. Remember, the land northward was this area of desolation. So basically, they all went to North America, right? Assuming most of what happened here is in Central America, they all go to the land northward, North America and Canada and all that stuff. Obviously, we don't know all the details on that, but they do leave. They build exceedingly large ships, and in fact, Hagoth actually comes back again and gets more ships, and then they leave. And it's interesting because at that point, they came back and got more provisions and then left with more people, but then they never hear from them again, ever again. And so they just assume they've been drowned in the sea, or they have no clue what happened with them. We suppose they were drowned in the depths of the sea because they never came back again. I don't know. Sometimes you wonder if those people, and the thing is guess who was with them? So look at verse, let's see. Verse 10. It came to pass in the 39th year of the reign of the judges, Shiblon dies. And Corianton had gone forth to the land northward in a ship to carry forth provisions unto the people who had gone forth into that land. So instead of leaving the records with Shiblon, he ends up in verse 11, leaving it with Helaman, the son of Helaman, okay? The Helaman that had already passed away, so his son, Helaman, because they couldn't leave it with Corianton. So there's an implication here they probably would have left it with Corianton, which is kind of cool. But Corianton had gone in the ships up north. So guess what? We know. To me, that tells me that this group of people in going north had the gospel. They had the gospel. And so you wonder sometimes if there's more records there, right? If there's other records that we don't even have eyes on because of this group of people that had left. So just kind of an interesting thought. And we know they went north, as they said, but they had never been heard of again. Now, going north is relative because they could have ended up all over the place, right, north. But anyway, that's what happens. So historically, they go out. At this point, a lot of the people that were involved, Moroni, Shiblon, and even towards the end of this chapter, Pahoran dies. Actually, it's the beginning of the next chapter, which we're going to talk about in this week's lesson. But unfortunately, Moroni, son of Moroni, has to deal with another army that comes in. And so at the end of this chapter, an army comes in. It's about the 39th year of the reign of Judges. So we're around 52 BC. So it's been quite a few years. I mean, they have all this prosperity for about 10 years, right? Because they're doing the right thing. And then all of a sudden the Lamanites decide they want to attack again. So that's where we kind of end this chapter. So anyway, again, I thought those were some important verses. I hope you got some good things out of that. There really were some good things that happened in those verses. And so hopefully that's helpful just to remember. Sometimes communication can be lost in translation, if you will. And so let's just make sure that as we are communicating with those around us, that we look at intent, we look at the heart, and we really seek to understand instead of, seeking to become angry back or defensive, if you will. Because I think that's a common trait, right? To be a little defensive, like, why would you say that to me, type thing. And I think ultimately, as people, we do try to do the right things, but we can also sometimes misconstrue things. So, and I think the great example that we learned today is that in spite of wars and things that happen, we don't have to let our hearts be hardened. We can be softened and humbled, and then remember the deliverance we received, and pray continually and have that communication open with God. So I hope you guys have an awesome morning. I assume most of you don't get a chance to really see this lesson, but like I said, I wanted to throw this lesson in there before this week's actual lesson because I didn't have a chance to record it this week. With school starting and work being as busy as it was back in March, it was just a crazy week. So that's why I wanted to record it this morning. So I assume most of you hopefully will get a chance to see this before the lesson today. But yeah, we'll talk to you later today. We're going to get into the book of Helaman now, and we're going to talk about Pahoran. Pahoran dies, and we're going to talk about what happens with his sons, and unfortunately, this pride cycle that we talked about. So we just learned about what it is to not have a pride cycle, because this group of people is really good, and now we're going to learn what happens when we go ahead and let the pride get to us. So we'll see you guys soon.